I am Chisa Wabara. This is my LinkedIn, so feel free to scan if you'd like. And I'm the Director of Product and Transformation at EngineerBetter. So I'm effectively in charge of building out both the product practice and the delivery practice at EngineerBetter. And I've been with them for about a year. Previous history, basically I've worked with ThoughtWorks as well as Pivotal, and have come up through agile analysis into more of the product space and delivery. And I've also done a ton in the DEI space, just honestly out of necessity. And so I do consult in that space as well. So EngineerBetter, and sorry for, you can't see it at the top, but just a little bit about us. We're a UK-based cloud-native productivity consultancy. We were established in 2016 and are known for our expertise in product transformation as well as enabling delivery teams. Authorities on Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes, what have you. And last year, we merged with Container Solutions, who is one of the largest cloud-native consultancies in Europe. So, as a product person, I like to make sure that we're taking at least high-level metrics. So by the end of this, we're hoping that you'll have a little bit more around these two things. So the first one is insights into some of the guiding principles that we have employed at EngineerBetter for policy creation. And the second is concrete examples of how said insights are directly applied to our company policy. So, very lightweight agenda. I have a question for you to start. Then from there, we're going to unpack some of the principles and I'll provide some examples, and then we'll have a quick checkout. So this should be a fairly lightweight discussion. It's not going to be very heavy. All right, I need you to pull out your phones or your laptops. I'm hoping everyone is connected to Wi-Fi. Scan the QR code, and my first question for you is, what are the 5 most common organizational culture issues that you've run into, whether it's past or present? So I'll give you a second to go ahead and do that. So everyone has the code? Okay, great. I see some nodding. All right, I think we can pull up the results screen. Thank you. So yeah, I have an inkling about the types of things that will come up. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because oftentimes I'll run into the same types of issues in places. And again, I have an inkling about where I think some of your responses will fall. And then yeah, to start, we'll basically collect the top 5. And see what gets generated. So I'll give you a couple more minutes. Last chance to get responses in. Struggling with population. Okay. Well, if it doesn't pull up, then actually what I'm going to ask my tech support in the back to do is turn on a couple other mics, and I'm going to walk around and collect some responses. So number 3 and number 1. Okay. So number 3, would anyone like to share what they populated? Yep, thank you.
Hi, can't remember exactly what I wrote, but the first one was, I think, glass ceiling.
Glass ceiling? Yep.
Stereotyping. Ignorance. Lip service. And white surveyor.
Okay. Anyone else? Does that resonate with anyone else? No others? Did anyone post anything differently? Or anything different? Nope? Okay. All right, we can turn off number 3. I think one of the big ones for me, which actually speaks to it, right, is it safe for me to be here? And I'm not talking about just physical safety, right? And I know that we've probably seen this 1,000 times, but this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think it's really interesting because we're expected to perform, which is at the top of the pyramid, when oftentimes what I found is that my basic needs are missing in my place of employment. So obviously I'm hopefully compensated enough to be able to meet my physiological needs. But the next tier there around safety and security, and previous talk actually just discussed psychological safety, is missing. So I don't have the safety to make mistakes. I don't really have the security that I know that I have, that I'm able to make those types of, or take opportunities. And that's something that's really interesting because the policies and governments that we put in place in an organization should support this. Without those things, it's really tough to then build solid relationships, to trust that you're going to have the system of support that you need and be able to then move up the pyramid. So the first principle, or the first thing that I want to chat about, is main squeeze or I don't want it. So oftentimes what I found is that working to create inclusive and supportive cultures it's a side dish. Our first choice should not be a substitute for the real thing. So we do a lot of gymnastics to create organizations that provide systems of support, as opposed to just making sure that we've authentically incorporated the voices and the conversations and the opinions and the perspectives that would naturally create that environment. And I think, well, I had another analogy, but I won't use it. So when you think about crops, it's the difference between a GMO, which in truth, genetically modified produce. There's nothing wrong with it. It makes sense, and it's great if you need more, or if in some cases. But like, we should be defaulting to authentic, right? That there in a lot of situations isn't really a replacement for an original. And I think that for me is one of the first things when we talk about authenticity. Are we defaulting to the synthetic option, or are we first going to the authentic option and then filling in where necessary, or where necessity like dictates that we would need more? The other piece is that it's really a lack of embedding change into governance and policy. So in a lot of organizations, culture, thinking about DEI, it's a side dish. It's something that's done on the side or on top of. It's not a part of the core competency of the business. If you think about this, the way that in which you would incorporate DEI into the core competency of the business is simply to have a group of people that are representative of the product or the service that you're working to build. And I think the thing that we need to start with is being really honest about, are we or are we not making this a side dish? So number 2, don't talk about it, be about it. Yeah. So this might feel familiar. I actually really like this illustration, just because oftentimes what I find is that there's a lot of humming and hawing that happens in the workplace, even in life, where people don't just take ownership and admit to where we're at. We'll have kind of like half-assed apologies. And I think part of working to create that authenticity and working to truly change policy is taking ownership and being really accountable for what changes you're trying to make. I mean, that can be a really difficult thing to do. So as leaders, it's important to admit when you're wrong. If someone is right, stop fighting their words and just do something about it. The amount of courage that it takes to do this, it's a lot. Like I fully acknowledge that it's really difficult to actually do this. And as leaders, and in truth, all of us are leaders at some point, at any given moment, right? It's really difficult to make sure that you're standing in your truth, but it's something that in truth we need to work towards doing. So it's about creating that type of accountability. Lastly, experiment-led evidence-based decisioning. So as a product director, this is actually one of the core visions that I have for both my organization, moving them towards a more product-led organization, as well as for all of my teams. And what that means is it's not necessarily, oh, we build products in XYZ. It's about really thinking about the mentality and mindset, but around how we go about affecting change within our communities and within our system. So evidence-led experiment-led and evidence-based means everyone is responsible for providing receipts. If you can't justify what you're doing, if you can't explain it and break it down, then why would we invest in that thing? And if there is justification, why have we chosen something else that doesn't have the same level of justification? So working to remove those types of double standards is something that we do within our organization. And we do that by effectively adopting a product thinking mindset, adopting an experiment-led approach to the way in which we make decisions within our organization. The other piece of this is organizational design mirrors organizational structure. So if you haven't heard of Conway's Law, it's basically a theory that hypothesizes or postulates that the way in which your organization is designed will directly affect the way in which the value of your outcomes are delivered. So if you have distributed teams or modular that work together with checks and balances, chances are that's the way that you'll deliver a service. Similarly, if you have a large co-located team that's all kind of like brought somewhere mixed together, you'll probably have a monolithic structure that's a lot harder to kind of discern and keep track of because you may not have enough feedback loops. There's a time and place for each of these, and it really depends on the type of organization you're working to build. But for us, we lean towards creating balanced teams that have clear checks and balances and voices heard. We have paired ownership, which means that while there is an identified action owner or owner of an initiative, it tends to also be shared in that there's someone that they can collaborate with so that the onus isn't necessarily all on one person. So it's about, again, creating those systems of support. And then we create explicit feedback loops that are built into our internal frameworks. So basically, the way in which our organization is structured directly mimics the way in which we expect everyone to deliver value to ourselves as well as to our customers and our clients. And that's something oftentimes that we'll find tends to be very different with a lot of other organizations that we interact with. What happens internally isn't the same as what is then delivered externally. This also goes hand in hand with the idea that it's never too late to learn, and the importance of adopting a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. I think oftentimes when we think about growth mindsets, everyone wants to have one. That's absolutely what we're working towards doing. But I don't think that we take the time to think about what that means and what it costs and what it looks like. So it's not just about picking up everything that looks shiny and new. It's really about thinking how feedback mechanisms look. How do we embrace challenges as they come up? How much desire to learn is there within the organization, and how easy is it for you to learn? How easy is it for you to take advantage of opportunities and to present something new? And that's something that, in truth, takes a lot of self-awareness to reflect on, both within yourself and then additionally extending that to your teams as well as to the rest of your organization. So this brings us to number 2. If it's broke, fix it. So what I found oftentimes is that I'll see something in my organization that isn't working. I may or may not say something about it, but in truth, if nothing is said about it, then nothing changes. The other side of that is maybe I do say something and I'm ignored. When we have or find these opportunities within our organizations, it's kind of tough to expect change to happen if we haven't acknowledged it, even if it's a situation where you've agreed to disagree and move on. Voicing the fact that it's there is already a start. So I have 2 examples. We have a lot more, but I have 2 examples of where we actually were able to do this inside our organization. One is overhauling our entire hiring process. In my opinion, we did not have enough rigor around our hiring process when I first joined. And so I worked with the rest of my leadership team to change that. And it meant really looking at mapping out the service journey end to end of the way in which we hired today. Looked at hiring pipelines in terms of where we were looking and adjusted them. Making sure that we had clear scorecards so that everyone was measured similarly. And working on other opportunities to remove bias. So we looked at language in terms of the requests that we made. We looked at making sure that when we did have interviews, it wasn't just a single person, it was a panel or a group of people. We looked at making sure that if people did provide feedback, that they could justify the feedback that they provided, and we wrote things down. The other example I have is our onboarding process. We discovered that our onboarding process was incredibly inconsistent from person to person. There were so many gaps, and it wasn't really scalable because we had every department doing something different. So what we did was work to create a modular system where we created a template for onboarding, assigned anyone who came in new a project that they could then self-guided tour take themselves through, and created a shared system of accountability across the entire company so that everyone could contribute to the onboarding, receive feedback on the onboarding, and participate in the support of every new person that comes in without having a situation where that individual had to be directly managed. They also received an onboarding money as well as support from their manager, and we made sure that there were checks and balances in the form of actual ways of working and conversations or rituals each step of the way within the onboarding process. So we completely changed it. I think the cool thing about onboarding in particular is that we could then take this particular proof of concept or system and leverage it across the way that we onboarded people to everything, whether it was new to the company, new to a project engagement that we were about to start, or new to a specific role or skill. So that was something else that was really cool. And this might be obvious, but basically what I am suggesting is that you treat everything like a product. So you make sure that you understand what the problem is, and then you make sure that before you jump into solutions, that problem is validated and well understood so that you know what your riskiest assumptions are. From there, you then test out solutions, and once you feel pretty strongly or confident about the solution that you've chosen, you go ahead and start working on delivering and investing in that. Treating everything like a product has made it a lot easier for us to standardize the way in which we think about how we address problems that we see, again, within our community, within society, within our organization. Because, again, the outcomes are going to be completely different, but we're equitable in terms of how we think about the ways in which we should address them to make sure that we're not missing anything and having incomplete data sets or incomplete understandings of what the problem really is. So number 3, modeling behavior. And when I was on number 1, you may remember that I mentioned everyone is a leader, and this is absolutely true. In our organization, everyone is responsible for, again, providing evidence and being accountable. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO, it doesn't matter if you're an engineer on a delivery team, it doesn't matter if you're a product manager. If you believe something and put it forward, you have to then provide an example or help to provide an example of what good looks like. It's not fair to assume that people are going to understand what something looks like if they've never had an opportunity to see it, they've never had an opportunity to interact with it. It's an unfair ask. This goes hand in hand with self-advocacy, and this is something that the previous panelists mentioned as well. It really does start with learning how to promote yourself, and so working to make sure that the management and performance frameworks that we have in place do that is really important. We start with each individual and make sure that they're built up to a place where they can then be not only happy and effective, but also capable of justifying and having the confidence to speak their minds, to say what they really think. After you're able to do that and self-advocate for yourself, articulate your thoughts and tell stories around your perspective and what it is that you're working to achieve. You can then do that for your pair. You can then do that for your team. You can then do that for your organization. But it's really tough to do that if you haven't been taught or don't feel strong enough to do it for yourself first. So then we come to practice what you preach. And this takes practice, practice, practice. This is something that happens every single day. I am actually going to borrow a page from a different book. I'm currently in the process of interning to become a professional dog trainer, completely unrelated. But I've actually learned that when the majority of what you do as a dog trainer is behavior modification as well as learning, except you're doing it on a smaller scale because you're working with an animal that's only going to live maybe for a decade or a decade and a half max. And a couple things that we do make a lot of sense, one of which is positive reinforcement. So if something goes well, mark and reward the behavior that you want to see. If something doesn't go well, make sure that you've provided an alternative because in this case, just saying no isn't enough if you actually want to affect change. So I do want to add a disclaimer. In this context, just saying no is not enough. And again, that's if you care about improvement. So in this situation where you do care about improvement, say no and provide an alternative behavior. The other piece of this is that our company values are built into performance. So if you're not passing, let's start there. We actually do measure how well people meet company values as part of our performance framework, which is, I think, very different. Oftentimes, you'll find that company values sit off to the side, and we've brought them in and directly on, I guess you could say it's kind of tied to career path, but it's tied to growth as well as performance. So 5, give people the outs they deserve. When your job feels like a toxic relationship, it's probably time to get out. And that is a huge red flag to me. I wanted to actually share actual things that we say as a leadership team and as like peers within the organization. So one is don't put the job first. We expect people to live their lives. We expect you to have a life outside of the organization. Overtime breaks our values. So we actually have, yes, a value that basically says, oh, we don't support overtime. It's not something that we do. I take mental health days because seeing is believing. So oftentimes we'll see policies within organizations that are there, but no one uses them and no one questions why they're not being used. But we want people to use their policies, and we do that by, I guess you could say, showing vulnerability and dialing into the fact that we use them too. Feel free to use them. If you can't talk to me, talk to someone else. So as a line manager, as a people manager, it can be kind of tough if the only person that one of my reports can talk to is me. Oftentimes people have to be given permission to say, if you need to go around me, do it. What matters most is that you're supported. So we proactively make sure that we're saying that explicitly. And then lastly, we will help you leave if that's what's best for you. There's oftentimes this unspoken, or people feel a lot of shame and grief for wanting to leave a place. And we do as much as we can to make sure that they know there's no reason to feel bad about leaving if that's what makes the most sense for you. And we don't want you to feel like you're being held here. So 6, if it's not a yes, it's a no. And this one's really important. It's about clear communication, removing any gray area that may exist. This was one of my dad's favorite quotes. He used to say it all the time. Don't piss on my head and tell me it's raining. So if the answer is yes, great. If the answer isn't yes and you don't know, that means the answer is no until it's yes. There's nothing wrong with either of those answers. But when someone leaves you in a place of indecision, that actually just means that no one can move forward because you have no information on which to make a decision. So if it's not a yes, it's a no. And if someone is giving you an in-between, assume the answer is no because it isn't yes. So I think this is the hard truth that I've realized with a lot of organizations, and that's that if you can't call yourself a company that cares and say that you've done a thing that you haven't done. So if you don't have representation in positions of authority, if you act uncomfortable whenever someone that works for you tells you the truth, or about your metrics or about their experiences, and then have your legal team do a ton of fancy dances, the answer is no. It's not a yes. So I'm going to leave you with, culture is what's cultivated every single day. It's simple, but it's actually not easy to get from yeses to nos, right? That's a fairly binary thing. The gray is what makes it difficult. But again, like if it's not a yes, it's a no until it becomes a yes or otherwise. And having the courage to live your truth every day is a really difficult thing to do, which I acknowledge. But I think the place to start is with the truth. Is it a yes or a no? And if it's a no or it's not a yes yet, let's figure out how to sort through that and clarify some things so that we can then get those yeses or nos clarified. So I'm hoping by the end of this that you have learned and gained some insights about how we do things at EB. Safe, fair. This is interactive, so thumbs up. Okay. And then also that concrete examples were provided to you where you were able to see some of the policies and changes and actions that we take within the organization. Fair? Great. Sorry. So, and I don't know if we have time for this, but I did want to ask a question, and that is, can you share one thing that you took away from this presentation? So is anyone willing or interested in kind of sharing? We don't have time. So I'm going to shut it down. But come to me after, because I would like to hear. So thank you very much for your time. We are hiring, so feel free to scan if this is something you're interested in. And thank you.